This shows the distribution of economic freedom by regions. North America, which is the United States, Canada, and Mexico, the NAFTA countries, sitting at the top. But look at Europe with its good performance. And one of the things that's happened over the life of our index is that the standard deviation of European scores has been reducing over time. When we first started this index, there was a very high standard deviation of European scores. We had one group up here and another group down here. And over the 15 years, the European scores have narrowed, the range has narrowed, and now almost all European scores are in the range between 60 and 80, and averaging out to that 70 there. We find very high standard deviation of data in some of the other regions. Asia Pacific, for example, we have the very top performers in the index in the Asia Pacific region, the most free countries, and we also have the most repressed countries in that region, so there's a very wide disparity among countries there. Which countries did the best? The top 10 in our index this year: Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, 4 Asian countries in the top 5 there. Ireland, the best performer in Europe by a significant margin. Denmark, Switzerland, the United Kingdom. But there are 10 European countries in the top 20 of our index. So Europe really does quite well. European countries do quite well overall. I thought it would be interesting to look at the bottom 10 as well, the countries who are the poorest performers in the index. The country that lost the most economic freedom this year was Zimbabwe. They lost about 6 points of economic freedom as measured on our scale just this year alone. It's very hard to have a movement that large on our index. Countries might move a half point or a point sometimes, but for a country to move 6 points, that reflects a significant change indeed. And of course, you're all familiar with the tragic circumstances of life in Zimbabwe right now. The country that lost the second most amount of economic freedom this year was Venezuela. And you've seen recent political developments there with President Chavez basically manipulating the Constitution to allow himself to become president for life. So we suspect that Venezuela will be in for a rough time, despite its rather significant oil wealth. Now, how about Poland? I think I've given you in the handout there, if you picked one up, a copy actually of the Poland page, so you can read that at your leisure. I wanted to highlight a couple of the graphs. The overall score for Poland, 60.3, is just a little bit above the world average score. Your rank among the 43 countries in the Europe region is only 35th, so that's not too great. The world ranking of 82nd, also I would say that puts you right in the mid-range of countries worldwide. But I do want to go back and emphasize what I started with, that context of 15 years of significant improvement in economic freedom. So you made tremendous progress so far since the revolution. But indeed, these figures would seem to indicate that there's also some room left for improvement. If you look at the individual scores compared to world averages, it's actually quite unusual, the business freedom score. It's unusual for a European country to have business freedom scores that are below the world average. Remember, we're measuring regulations there, government regulations, something that's entirely in the control of the government, in fact. And these are policies that are relatively easy for a government to change. In most places around the world, you can see very rapid improvement there. But that's an area where Poland is not performing quite as well as some of its neighbors. The other scores are, many of them are about at the world average: investment freedom and financial freedom above the world average. Government size significantly below world average. That's because your government takes up about 43–44% of economic activity is government spending in Poland. So that's a pretty high level. It's not the highest in Europe, but it is certainly higher than the world average. You can see over time Poland's scores haven't changed all that much. a little bit of a peak there in 2002, but otherwise the score changes have been fairly modest for Poland. But we have, as I said, seen enough change in Poland to leap you over a number of other countries. The most notable gain in the Polish score this year was a 5-point increase in freedom from corruption. That indeed is very significant, shows a maturing of the Polish economy. Something that we look for in European countries in general are very high scores in freedom for corruption. And you see Poland making a rapid gain here is very significant and important. On the other hand, a few areas of concern. I mentioned the high level of government spending. We had reports of regulatory red tape and administrative unpredictability and uncertainty in Poland. And so that's reflected in our investment freedom score. We saw that privatization had stagnated in recent years, and that shows up in the scores. You still have a significant number of public enterprises run by the government rather than by the private sector. And finally, there were reports of piracy of intellectual property that were a little bit out of the normal range we would expect for a European country. So that held the Polish score down a bit. Finally, I wanted to put this graph up. This looks like that graph we were looking at before, but it's a little bit different now. The vertical bars, previously they reflected the world average. Now these vertical bars over here on the right-hand side reflect the European average. So you can see on this graph exactly how Poland is doing compared to your closest neighbors and competitors here in Europe and particularly in the European Union. Again, the business freedom score is considerably lower than European averages, so that's one area where if I were involved in Polish decision-making, I'd want to be looking at that area, significant. And freedom from corruption and property rights scores, which fall below the European average. Sometimes those areas take a little longer for countries to improve in, because you're talking about, in some cases, changing customs, and we see changes in these scores move rather slowly. Whereas business regulation, you can change quickly, but changes in corruption, property rights, they reflect the attitudes of the people, culture in the country. And indeed, that can take perhaps, we're talking about a generation in some cases to see significant improvements in those scores. Finally, I just wanted to put our website up there because the entire database, all the scores, all the text, the complete text of the book, and all the scores over the 15 years, all the data we collected over the 15 years is available at that website. It can be extracted, it can be manipulated, it can be used by yourselves for any purposes you want. I would invite you to do that. In fact, I would urge you to do that. It's kind of hard to collect this data, and we obviously use it to produce a book. The book, it's a pretty thick book. It looks like this, but there are a lot of other things that people can do with that data, and I would invite you to use it in your own researches. I look forward to your questions in a little while, so thank you very much.